Okay, so here we are on the second day um, of our summer solstice Sesshin 2022 with a sort of something like a half house at Mountain Cloud, kind of half full house, and a Zoom gathering as well, and we're working out these, I know we've had some little kinks in the technicalities of making this work, and you've all been wonderfully patient, and I think it's going rather well in spite of those things, and I think they're smoothing out as well. So thank you all. I want to let you know what I'm going to be doing in this talk today and tomorrow, which is I'm going to take one of the classic koans out of the Wu Men Guan or Mu Mon Kan, which Valerie referenced yesterday, a collection of koans put together published in 1228 or 1229 in China. So it's actually sort of the latest of the classic collections from China that we use. We're going to look at a koan from that, I think, over these next 2 days. And I'll be coming at it from various angles and hoping to make it relevant and pertinent and helpful. I got to just give a little, I don't know what to call it, a sort of cautionary note from my side out of just some kind of a kindness to my brain. I've been having a more difficult time with my neurology lately. So this is also my sort of exit ramp, or my excuse if I really seem to be making no sense. I think it's just about holding together enough to do this talk. I really hope so. And but it has been a little bit more challenging lately for various reasons. My neurology, I'm talking about, and hopefully you'll hear that and just completely forget about it and have no idea what I'm talking about. So let's hope it goes that way. Some notes just on the doing of a session, the making of a session, the surviving of a session. For those of you who are in the Zendo, this is particularly for you. You'll have noticed in the little lobby outside the Zendo that there's a ton of cushions and benches and back jacks. And I really want to encourage you to consider that a store that is exclusively for you. Use it, plunder it, just as you want. And change things between sits. If you do a sit and you're not comfortable, go out there, rummage around, in the break and in the walking, and find something else. If you're really in screaming pain during a sit, just move. Don't hesitate. I know there's quite a lot of sort of deep, experienced sitters in the Zendo, but don't be intimidated by them. Just because they're sitting in blissful, deep, silent stillness and ease doesn't mean you have to pretend you are. If you need to adjust, do so, okay? Because we don't want you damaging yourself here. And if that includes leaving the Zendo and going and having a lie down, just do it. It is a challenging thing to do, these longer intensive retreats. The good news is that over time, we can not only sort of acclimate to them relatively easily, we simply get, our bodies start to accommodate to them. We're very, plastic species. I mean, we're very good at adjusting and adapting, but it's not overnight. So over time, if you're drawn to it and you keep at it, you can get very comfortable in these retreats. And you know, and then we can go into, you know, wonderful territories of consciousness that are just totally here, but not normally accessible and not normally seen by us. So that's great. But the bad news is that it does take a while to acclimate to them, to adjust to longer sitting. And so I want to just bring in a little notion here, two features, what do I call them? Two paramitas. There are 6 paramitas in Mahayana Buddhism, which are 6 kind of, sometimes translated, virtues. It's probably the easiest translation to get what they are. Virtues. I mean, they mean perfections. A paramita is a perfection, but it's not really helpful to use that word, I don't think, to understand it. It's basically a virtue or a kind of helpful characteristic, let's say, helpful human characteristic. And the 3rd and the 4th paramitas are number 3, patience, and number 4, sort of resolution or resolve or determination or constancy is another possible translation. I rather like that. Patience, constancy. They are the 2 footsteps that actually carry us through practice. So there's the patience of not shying away from or suppressing how things actually are, the patience that lets things be as they are, and that finds a way, just checking that, finds a way to be okay with the way things are. And on the other hand, or the other foot, so to speak, is constancy. We keep going. Determination, yeah, you could call it that. It's virya in Sanskrit. And you know, some of you will know virya from the word is sometimes used in yoga practice. And it means sort of flavors of sort of being resolved about something. You know, I will keep going. I do keep going. I keep going. I carry on, right? You know, so it's patience and carry on. Patience and keep going. Both. There's a beautiful twin pairing of human attributes of our human heart mind that we can access, we can develop, cultivate. I always feel that with all these things, such as those sort of positive characteristics, in some ways we develop and cultivate them, but it feels more like uncovering them more. We've already got them. And practice helps us uncover them more. And then as that's going on, they in turn help our practice. Okay, so have that in the back of your back pocket, slip it into the pocket back here. Patience and resolve. Okay, and I'm going to tell you actually the one that most of us, and what I think I've seen over the years in guiding others, the one that's usually actually in shortest supply when we're in a deep practice or everyday practice too, is actually the patience. Learning to let things be as they are is critical. It's actually the basis of Buddhism. The first noble truth says there is suffering. And we can take that to mean don't suppress or hide suffering. Recognize it and allow it. Allow suffering to show itself. Now, of course, this is not just personal. It's suffering of self and others. Others meaning the whole wide world and its many beings and all the ways that there is suffering in the world. So, but also not forgetting ourselves that there is suffering. And yes, this critical starting point of the whole process of practice, the whole evolution through Buddhist practice is don't deny it. Let it be, so to speak. Then the process of assuaging it, reducing it, and ultimately perhaps being liberated from it, then that can unfold in the way that practice has as a kind of a shining goal, end of the rainbow. But it always starts with let the suffering be. Don't push it away. Don't deny it. So patience, 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 and if you need it, resolve. Okay. So to the koan, I'm gonna read it through, and some of you will just glide into blissful boundlessness as I do so, no doubt. And some of you will be scratching your heads thinking, what the hell is this about? And why should I give it my attention? So I'm speaking mostly to the second, because the first don't really need any help. They're blissing out already. So, so those of you who are really head scratching, sorry, I'm just going to look at the chat. Maybe there's a message for me. Tick, 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 tick. Just want to make sure. Oh, there's greetings to whoever's in Japan. Thank you for the note. Okay, so far I take it that nothing's sort of gone horribly wrong audio visually, or I would have heard. Okay, this koan is number 15 in the Gateless Gate. That's the translation of Wu Men Guan or Mu Mon Kan. And here it is in its original Chinese. Actually, I need to give you a little tiny bit of backstory. There's a monk who's been wandering around to different monasteries, and he's called Dongshan in Chinese, Tozan in Japanese. And he comes to the monastery of this great master, Yunmen, or Unmon in Japanese, who lived 864 to 949. So Tozan arrives and he immediately wants to talk to the master Yunmen. So here's where the original Chinese koan picks up the story. It goes like this. Because Dongshan interviewed in the line, Yunmen asked, what place did you leave from nearby? Okay, so even there, I think I got to do a little bit of parsing out. Because Dongshan interviewed in the line, I think that means Yunmen was sort of seeing students. And Dongshan, although he was new and he just arrived, he put himself in the queue, in the line, to speak with Unmon, Yunmen, immediately. Okay. So the interview happens, and Yunmen, it goes like this. Yunmen asks him, what place did you leave from nearby? And Dongshan said, Chadu. Hey, I got to just ask, is audio okay?
No.
No? No echo here. Better. Okay. Okay, so I'm trying again now. And please, Valerie, just let me know if it's okay. So there's someone saying sounds great. Valerie, is it okay with you guys? Sounds good in the Zendo. Thank you. Okay, so I'll resume. So we're going through the koan. Okay, so just to recap, this young monk Dongshan has arrived with Yunmen, and Yunmen asks him, where have you come from? And he answers, Chadu. That's the place he's been. Then Yunmen says, at what place in the summer? Meaning, where were you during the summer? And Dongshan says, south of the lake. That's further away. Then Yunmen says, when did you leave there? And Dongshan says, the 25th of the 8th month. That's a very precise date. The 25th of the 8th month. Yunmen then said, I release you from 3 beatings of the stick. In other words, sort of, you ought to get 3 beatings of the stick, but I'm going to spare you them. Okay, so there's a bit to unpack there, but I'm not going to do that yet. The next day, Dongshan comes up again to ask Yunmen a question. And the question is, I'm unclear why yesterday the master, you master Yunmen, spared me 3 beatings of the stick. I do not know where I was wrong. Sort of, what have I done wrong? Why should I have been hit 3 times with your stick? And Yunmen said, Mr. Bag of Cooked Rice, west of the river now, south of the lake now. Why are you going on like that? Why are you wondering like that? So, Mr. Bag of Cooked Rice, what are you doing? Wandering west of the river, south of the lake. And at these words, Dongshan had a great realization. Okay, that's the end of the koan. No, there's several things that need to be sort of spoken to, I think, before we even really get into it in any deeper way. I think you understand the setup. You know, this new monk has arrived. He's introduced himself to the master, Yunmen, and he gets these 3 questions. Where have you come from? I've come from Chadu. Well, where were you during the summer? Meaning earlier. I was south of the lake. And when did you leave there? I left there on the 25th day of the 8th month. Okay. Then Yunmen says, really, you deserve a blow, with my stick. I should hit you with my stick. But I'll spare you. So, okay. So the first sort of question, the first point really is, well, what does he mean he should be hit? You'll know from kind of Zen mythology, those of you who are relatively new to it, and you'll know from time in the Zendo that there is a stick, the kyosaku, that traditionally is used these days if somebody wants it, which strikes the sort of flesh between your shoulder blade and your neck. There's a soft spot there, and it's can be quite sort of stimulating. It's actually, in long retreats, it can actually be quite nice. It's kind of like little bit of a shiatsu point. It's not supposed to be punitive actually these days. It's at all. It's supposed to be just a little help to concentration, aliveness, and it can indeed do that. But in the old days, way back, it actually could be more punitive. And I'm happy that that's long since been left behind. But in these really early days in China, it was, some of the monasteries were kind of rough. You know, there would be some number of people there who were there for all the reasons you'd expect, that bona fide wish to pursue their spiritual lives and go on the great spiritual quest, the great spiritual search. But actually there were also, it was sometimes, you know, the prisoners would be there, would be sent to a monastery in lieu of a prison term. And sometimes, you know, sort of troublesome people would be packed off to a monastery and so on. So it wasn't quite the sort of idyllic image that we might have of them, at least not always, you know. And not only that, but there were weird, I mean, I'm just trying to give you a sort of picture of what a large monastery was like as far as we know in China. I mean, there were even, I don't know exactly how to put it, but weird sort of tax shenanigans that went on, whereby sort of large landowners could parcel off some of their land to a monastery and get tax breaks that way, and or make large donations as sort of tax breaks. I don't know. It was all a little bit. There was a murky side to it, let's say, and at least in some cases, and amidst all that, there was more corporal punishment than we would at all tolerate today. You know, I'm thinking, you know, sometimes I wonder if it was a bit like, say, you know, European navies in the 18th and 19th centuries. You know, I don't know, you know, where, you know, sailors would get flogged and things on deck if they were insubordinate or something. I don't think it was quite as extreme as that, but possibly there was more of corporal punishment than we would at all like to tolerate today. Not only that, but or actually mitigating that in a certain way. If you look through the history of koans as they get recorded, you know, you can see koans in their earliest iteration, you know, in the 9th century or something, and then in the later iteration, in the 11th century, and then 12th century, 13th century. Some of them, you can see this clear process by which they acquire in the story a bit more kind of graphic, sort of gory detail, which they simply didn't have in the first iteration. So I also wonder, like this koan collection, the Wu Mengguan, you know, was put together in the later Sung dynasty. And I think it's possible that by that time, somehow China was sort of tolerating or even had a taste for more kind of, I suppose, sort of basically what we call violence. You know, I mean, for example, Yunmen, this master here, when he's first, when he has his, when there are records of his biography, the earliest ones we have make no mention actually of his sort of awakening process. But sorry, just give me 1 second. So yeah, the first records of Yunmen make no mention of how he awakened. Then you get a story it's somewhere in the 10th century that his awakening happened like this. He was visiting a master called Bokushu, and he every time he tried to see him, this master would slam the door on, not let him in. And one day he stuck his foot just inside the door jamb. So when the master slammed the door, his foot was in the way, and he could sort of push it open and say, "I really want to speak to you, master." And in the earliest record of this incident with his foot, that's how it's described. Then a little later, when the master slammed the door, he broke Yunmen's foot. A little later still, Yunmen actually put his whole leg in the door, and the master slammed the door so hard that he broke his leg. In other words, there's a sort of escalation of brutality in the story, frankly, which somehow I think speaks more to the tastes, which I don't understand, but the taste of the later times, rather than what actually happened originally, if you see what I mean. I've read about this, various scholars have analyzed this, and hence this Er's app actually has a great book on Yunmen and goes into this a little bit there. So the point being, I don't know really whether the beating referenced in this koan is a later addition. Could be, But one way or another, in a sense, let's put that to one side, and any distaste we might have about it or whatever, don't worry about it. The fact is, this young monk came and said, I've come from Chadu. Before that, I was in south of the lake, and I left there on the 25th day of the 8th month. And Yunmen says, in a nutshell, wrong. Not yet clear. Something to that effect. And the next day, the young monk Dongshan comes and says, what have I done wrong? Where was I wrong yesterday? And Yunmen says, Mr. Bag of cooked rice, you're just a sack of cooked rice. Or another translation from the a later version, you rice bag. Now, this is a term of, I was going to say endearment, but no, it's a term of how strong should I go? Term of contempt seems a bit too strong, but anyway, it's rude. It's what they would say about monks, right? Because the idea is just, all you do is sit there and eat rice. You got nothing more than, you're just a bag of rice. You're fed on rice, and you're kind of useless. You're fed, but you're useless. That's sort of the idea. So it's quite harsh criticism. You bag of rice. West of the river, south of the lake, wandering around. What are you doing all that for? It's something like that. And apparently, somehow, it was very, very helpful. Very helpful for young Dongshan. And hearing this, he had a great realization. So that's our story. Having got through the sort of cultural kind of barbs on it, and hopefully got okay with them enough to really settle into the story itself. I think also I could just note that actually throughout, I mean, in Zen, there is a certain sort of tension, actually, between these very two paramitas that I mentioned earlier. On the one hand, a kind of coming to terms with, a deep patience with, an allowing, a letting things be, a real sort of resting in things as they are and not resisting things as they are, on the one hand. And then sort of tension on the one hand between that, and on the other hand, a kind of, sort of, there is a certain sort of sternness, even a harshness that is in the Zen tradition. And, there's no mistaking it in old Japanese monasteries where the conditions could be quite harsh, and sometimes that was simply because they were very poor, and the sort of level of discipline was quite exacting, and for whatever reasons, and practice, I think, really, any deep practice of Buddhism, wherever you find it, does actually show these two sides. It needs to. But on the one hand, there's the sort of calling to account, the self-discipline and the discipline of practicing very consistently, and sometimes practicing kind of more than we want to, because that's how one way we gradually wear down our egoism, and on the other hand, deep patience as an essential ingredient, letting things be as they are, allowing. So there's kind of, you could say there's sort of a warm-heartedness on the one hand, and rather cold-heartedness on the other. And both are actually probably necessary for us humans. It's good to be warm-hearted, for sure, of course. But actually, on the other hand, as a process of training humans, some kind of calling to account is also needed. Some kind of, we got to be kind, and actually also here's what we're going to do, and so there is a balance between the two. And on some level, you might say, well, it's all warm-hearted, really. And that's probably true on some fundamental level. But until we're opening up on the fundamental level, it's not really. There is some discipline and kindness, virya and kshanti in its Sanskrit for patience. Resolve, resolution, determination on the one hand, patience, allowing on the other hand. Okay, so where are we? We are gonna pause this talk very shortly. The real core question is, Dongshan saying sort of, where was I wrong in my answers? He gives these very straight answers to the questions that Yunmen asks him. It's straightforward questions, you'd think. Where have you come from? Where were you in the summer? When did you leave there? Straightforward questions. And he gives straightforward answers. But Yunmen's somehow not satisfied. And in whatever way it was that he wasn't satisfied, that's the precise way in which, at the end of the story, Dongshan has this great realization. He realizes what it was that Yunmen was not satisfied with, so to speak. Or maybe a different way of putting it is what Yunmen was trying to help him realize. He gives those straight answers. They come from Chadu. Formerly, I was south of the lake back in the summer, and I left there in August. And it gives these straight answers. And Yunmen is not. Yunmen knows somehow there's more for this guy to come to realize. And because of Yunmen's sort of, non-satisfaction with it, because of his saying, nah, not quite right, because of that, it actually, the next day, and then Yunmen criticizes him again, you rice bag, you bag of cooked rice, you've just been wandering around west of the river, south of the lake. Because of that criticism, and that sort of saying, no, not yet, there's more, or something like that. Because of that, it actually, it's somehow just the right treatment for Dongshan at this time. And he does indeed go through a sort of radical shift that Yunmen knew was possible for him. And he does. So what we want to do tomorrow is investigate what that shift was. And I'm just going to give you a little hint that, there's a Buddhist teaching, many of you will know this, there's two truths or two realities. There's conventional reality and there's ultimate reality. And the tricky part about this is that, and conventional reality is what we've always known, that we're a self inside a body navigating the world out there, which is exactly what Dongshan was doing. I went to south of the lake, I went to that district, I left there on such and such a time, I've just come from somewhere else, Chadu. He's totally in that ordinary way we construct and experience reality, conventional reality. And Yunmen apparently wants him to release that and discover ultimate reality. And he does the next day. So it's very, very nice for Dongshan that he got treated in this way by Yunmen. But the tricky part for us is that we actually, and we'll see this later on, if we think that our conventional way of seeing things is sort of wrong, and there's a better way to see things, which is the ultimate way, and many of us will have that kind of mindset when we come into any practice that acknowledges the possibility of quote unquote awakening. But actually that is an incomplete view. Actually, the real point is that our conventional reality, the way we ordinarily see things, is exactly how this quote unquote ultimate reality shows itself. Always. They simply aren't two. But we kind of can't help constructing them as to if we're on a path of, a real sort of serious spiritual path. But the very idea that there's something else to realize is actually part of the problem, so to speak. The idea that there's something else to be found is what prevents our seeing this very moment just as it is, as it truly is, meaning including this sort of ultimate side. It's the fact that we think this sort of quote unquote ultimate is something else. In fact, it's just exactly this moment, just as it is, with nothing changing. So we call this retreat intimacy with all things. And the first step towards that is letting things be exactly as they are. We can't become intimate with things as they are if we think there's something wrong, there's something deficient, there's something else. There isn't anything else. So if you're anxious, thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get through this week? You know, that's what you become intimate with. Yeah, it's a bit counterintuitive, but let it be. Swing wide the gate. Let suffering be. You know, or if you're frustrated with your wandering mind, let that frustration be. You can find that frustration is perfect. The only thing that's required, so to speak, is to let it be, to drop resistance to it. So then you might think, oh, this damn resistance, how can I get rid of that? No, be intimate with resistance too. And you can't be intimate with it if you're trying to push that away. So intimacy with all things always begins with intimacy with inner and outer experience right now. Letting both, so to speak, flourish just as they are. Okay, let's pause there, and thank you very much for listening. And I hope it's been audible. I kind of think it has for Zoomers, I hope, and seems like it got okay for Zendo folks, hopefully. Thank you very much, team. Thank you, Valerie and Scott, so much in the Zendos. Thank you, Joe and Katie, and Johanna behind the scenes, and Mark, so much for all kinds of setup that's assisting us. Thank you.